Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Half Geek, Half Human podcast, where we explore the intersections between technology, business, and life. This podcast is powered by our company, Atiba, an IT consulting and software development firm based here in Nashville, Tennessee. And I'm Anna Kate Ross. I'm a project manager here, and I work with our software and web clients.
And I'm Joey Baggett, Director of Sales and Business Development. Wanted to take a moment to introduce our first ever guest on the podcast. He is a guest. He is also our founder, the fearless leader, the head geek of Atiba, JJ Rosen.
Thank you guys for having me.
Awesome. Well, we're so glad you could be here, JJ. The topic for this first podcast, for this first episode, is it's nothing personal, it's just business, and how that whole concept is actually a myth. So JJ wrote about this topic recently in the Tennessean, and we're really excited to dive into this this year and talk about also how this myth kind of plays into how we at Atiba approach our culture and our ways of doing business also.
Yeah, for sure. And this is it's going to be kind of an inside look into what Atiba is really like from the leadership down. And although it may look like JJ is forcing us to do this because he's the founder of the company, I promise it was all organic and he wanted to do this. We wanted to have him on here. So before we go too far into all that, let's just start right into some questions, because I think a lot of people are going to want to hear the story of where Atiba came from and how, because it was started in 1992. It's a long time ago, been around for 30 years. This is our 30th anniversary. So back in the 90s, when you're starting a business, can you tell us a little bit about like how you named the business and how you got started, where JJ's history kind of went?
Yeah. So I would love to say that I had like a business plan and I had everything all planned out ahead of time. But really, Atiba was somewhat started, by accident, a little bit organically. So I went to college, and I was actually a psychology major in college. And when I graduated, my original plan was to take a year off and work and save up some money and then go back to grad school in psychology. And then kind of the way Atiba was formed is I got this job for the state of Tennessee, which at the time sounded like a terrible job title, but it was better than waiting tables, like a real job that you would get after college. And it was called Child Support Coordinator for the state of Tennessee, which to me sounded really, really bad. But, it was a job, and at least I was kind of getting in the game of the work world. And it was interesting when I interviewed for the job, the guy who interviewed me, his name was George, who ended up being my boss. I asked him what the job description is and what I'd be doing, and he basically said, "Well, it's a brand new position. All really you need to do is try to think of ways to help the state collect more child support." So in Tennessee, they have these child support collection offices, all in every county, all around the state, that help people who have not been able to get their child support paid. They help them collect it. And so I asked him, what that really means. And he kind of shrugged his shoulders and said, "I don't know, you could maybe do like a newsletter or something, for the offices." He's like, basically, you could just do whatever you want. And so I thought, well, that sounds kind of, kind of good, a lot of freedom. And so I got the job, and I started the first week or so. I went to visit a few of the child support offices. And the first one I went to was in Manchester, Tennessee. So it's this, tiny little office, kind of a way out in the country. And I noticed that when I got there, that none of them had computers at all. And so I thought, well, maybe one thing I can do to help them is to get them computers.
And what year was this?
This was 1991.
Okay, early 90s.
And so, 1991. I think like going into 1992. And so they didn't have computers, and so I figured I was not a computer geek or nerd at the time, but I knew how to type a paper, and I figured at least they could have word processing. And so I talked to George, my boss, and he's like, "That's a good idea. Let me see if I can get you some budget." And that's when I got hooked on just all things computers. And so I ended up getting their computers set up, and then I just went all in, and I got really interested in building computers and fixing them and setting up networks. And so I just found my calling. Unfortunately, it was after I got out of school, but that's how things got started. And so essentially what happened is in my working day and night in my cube down at the state, I decided maybe it would be neat to write some software to help them manage the child support office. And I struggled through that, but I eventually wrote this software. And then I started installing it at a few offices across the state. And I was going to basically keep on doing that, and then, kind of start thinking about grad school when Anderson Consulting, or Accenture now, but it was Anderson back then, they got this big contract to do a child support management system that would be statewide. And all these guys from Anderson, they were in these expensive suits, and I was, just this kid in my cube. They kept on coming over to me and saying, "Oh, we need you to modify your software because we're going to use it to collect all the data. It's going to eventually go into our software." And so they were kind of assigning me a lot of things to do, and I started thinking about it, and they were charging like $200 an hour, like in 1992, and I was making $6 an hour. And I thought, well, maybe I could just quit and start my own little company, be a computer consultant. And so that's how Atiba was formed. So no real plan, just sort of accidentally. And so, Joe, you asked about the name. At the time, this was before the web was so popular. And so, you didn't have to worry about a domain name. And so I had actually the original name was called Competitive Intelligence. I don't know how I came up with that. I think I just made it up.
I'm glad that didn't stick.
Yeah. And so when the web started coming along, I realized I might need like a shorter name, something that was a little bit more domain name friendly. And even back then, when you would try to get a name, like if you go on, try to get a domain name, everything's taken. A lot was taken already. Even, anything related to tech was already gone. And so I'd spent like hours, like every night, trying to type in names, PC that, or tech this and that. And pretty much I was hitting a wall. And I'd been at a Vanderbilt basketball game, and the point guard, his name was Atiba Prater. And I got home that night and started doing my typing in, and then I just was starting to make up stuff. And then I just thought of his name for some reason, and I typed it in, and it was available. And then I looked it up, and it's in Swahili. It means one of understanding. And so that was good enough. And so that's how we ended up with our name.
I love that.
And that's how Atiba got going.
One of understanding. Okay, so that kind of pulls us back into, you mentioned, you said, unfortunately, you realized what you're really interested in after you got the psychology degree. But that kind of ties us back into the theme of this, which is, it's nothing personal, it's just business. How have you sort of Or maybe the question is, we will ask the how question, but as you were getting started, I imagine, it was a 1 or 2 man, maybe 3 man show for the first little bit. But when did you start kind of thinking about this concept and applying it to your business? I mean, maybe it was right away, or maybe it was when you had more employees. Like, how did that kind of start manifesting itself with Atiba?
So pretty much right off the bat, when I hired my first employee, which was really scary, and anybody who's ever started a business or been an entrepreneur in some way, it's scary to almost commit to to someone else, they're dependent upon you for their salary. And so when I hired the first person, his name is Glenn, and I guess 25 years or so later, he's still going. So the first few of us are all still together, and we started working, and I don't know that we were very healthy for one another. We both were like total workaholics. And we were having fun though. And this was like the .com stuff was starting to come along. So it was almost like you would, essentially do a lot of, all-nighters and, work on the weekends. And I kind of like that. So we were both cranking away, pretty hard, doing both IT stuff and web development, a lot of web development, day and night. So we were kind of both doing 2 shifts. And through that, quickly, you're spending so much time together that it goes beyond just like a coworker. I mean, you basically become like really good friends, which and I guess in hindsight kind of makes sense. You have similar interests, and you're having fun, kind of doing something new, and so I just noticed that we were, I kind of thought, well, this is kind of weird, but Glenn has like become like my best friend. Now, I don't know if he felt the same, but anyway, and then the next person that we hired, who's also still a real big part of what we're doing today, is Matthew, and same thing. We're all spending a lot of time together, and you kind of quickly, develop something beyond just like the work. Glenn, like his daughter at the time was, I think 5 or 6 years old, and she was always in the background when we were talking. So you kind of start, getting interested in someone's life outside of work and what they're doing. And then they always kind of, I know people would say you need to keep a distance, like almost keep it very professional at work, where it's not maybe healthy to build friendships. But I just liked the people I was working with. And so, we would do stuff outside of work. So we would go to concerts together, and we would, go to a movie. And so, and I do remember, kind of thinking, well, this kind of violates the general kind of rule of work. Like you should kind of keep those 2 things separate. But I just found it so rewarding. And then I also realized that everything kind of is personal. I mean, basically, whether you're at work or you're at home, it's the common denominator is you. And so, if we all have feelings, no matter where we're at. And so I just started realizing that was a big part of this. And especially for like a small business. I also kind of thought that is a little bit of a reason maybe people would want to work at our company, that, it was more personal. So it just kind of came naturally.
I'll say to that too, because it hit me one day. It actually wasn't that long ago that I was on a call with my boss, and he said something that kind of struck me. He's like, "Well, I'm telling you this more as a friend." And I realized like 2 things. And like, one, I've actually become friends with my boss, and 2, I was like, "Oh man, I've become friends with my boss." which was fine. Just kidding, Will. It's all good. But I do feel like those relationships develop quickly at Atiba, and that's what really makes it, a lot of fun to work here, is that people do become friends, and then you start to take things from in the office talking about work-related things to even just the occasional text or phone call at night or on the weekend, just checking in, like, how's it going? Hey, how was your weekend? How are things going for you? But then, like, I guess, how else do you take this making things personal and apply that to how we work day to day at Atiba?
Yeah. So, kind of as, we kept on going and doing more and more projects and you start hiring more people. I definitely was afraid of kind of losing that vibe. Because that's really one of the reasons I like this, and like, our company is, it's a little bit different. And so, you always hear, like, things change after, like, your 10th employee, and then changes again after your 20th. And so, I started, kind of getting, more intentional about it, I guess is the best way to say. Well, at the same time, I think it's important to be sincere, like, and genuine. I think it's kind of hard to fake, that kind of general, it's everything's personal, essentially, in the workplace. And so, a few things that started thinking on that would be good to do, and also, I should say, at the beginning, this was sort of me thinking, but then very quickly it got to be where, everyone was giving input on what our culture should be like. And that in itself is important. I think, just to ask people, like, how not just would work, how can we help you, not just with work, but just life in general, like, even outside of work. And so yeah, a lot of, like, what we've done is from feedback from others and ideas from others. But right off the bat, I remember when Glenn and Matthew, when I first hired them, I thought, okay, you're supposed to have, like, 2 weeks vacation, and you get these certain days off, and this and that, and then we're all working so much. Like, I remember Glenn one time called and said, "Hey, I need to take Friday off to go do this, with my daughter." And I was like, "Just do whatever you want. Like, I mean, if anything, I owe you the time. So, you don't ever have to ask. Just do whatever's best for you." And no shame in that. And so it kind of started there with having a lot of flexibility. And that's something that I personally would like, and it seems like we all want to have some control over, our lives, at home and the personal side. And so, like we said, there's not that much separation between you at work and you at home. And so, flexibility around time, I think is something that we've always had. And basically, that makes sense to me, just because, it's not like, kids. We're all like, you should decide how you plan your day. And if you have something that's come up that you need to do, or you just need a break, I would trust that's real and just let people decide, what they want to do on their own. So flexibility around time is, like, kind of something, that, we kind of established early. We also, during the pandemic, of course, it's gotten to be like, work from home. We always have had this thing, like, way before the pandemic, we called it office optional. And basically the thing around that too was, you should work from wherever you're most productive and comfortable. So some people are uncomfortable in an office. Some people get cabin fever and want to get out of their house and go to an office. And so flexibility around where you work, I think that was kind of like, added in pretty early on. The other things, trying to establish this, and Joey, like as you said, like it may be kind of weird sometimes, like if I just randomly like text, someone, say, hey, just checking in to see how you're doing. But I kind of thought with that, it's basically genuine. Like, if the other day, someone was had COVID, they were sick for a little bit, and just like a friend, outside of work, there's no reason why you shouldn't check on them. And so, anyway, it's just kind of setting that vibe, and then I guess this took a while, but years later, and this was again more suggestions from other people. We started like putting in a few things that would kind of support what we're saying. So, for example, we started this personal perks plan, and the idea behind that is perks. Oftentimes, like a company will give you like a gym membership, or a gift for the holidays or something. But started thinking about it, and like not everybody wants that. Like other people might have other needs in their life that would be more valuable. So we started this where we personalized whatever perks we're giving, and we essentially just asked people, how can we help you outside of work? So we've just had a number of things we just kept on going with, trying to like establish this as the vibe. And I would say early on, it was just like a few of us. There was no need for that. It was just a bunch of folks hanging out. But with more of us as we've grown, we've tried to be more intentional about it.
Yeah, very cool. And I was just going to kind of ask, like, as we've grown, some of these things are easy to keep going with, and sometimes it's a little bit harder. Do you have any like examples, or like sometimes people aren't good fits, or sometimes clients aren't good fits, or sometimes you kind of have to draw a hard line? And what kind of tips or maybe advice or counsel do you have to maintain this philosophy of, it's trying to make things more personal and not just draw a hard line with business? How do you incorporate that when you do have to draw a hard line?
So, yeah, that's a good question. And because I think there's a lot of kind of gray areas around, optimizing, not only this, the personal side, but, the business part too, of making sure the business is doing well. And there's been some lessons learned with that. Like it's when someone has not been the right fit and you kind of become friends with them, that can be hard, because you don't want to hurt them. But at the same time, you don't want to hurt the business. And so there was a interesting example. This is 15 years ago, or maybe more, actually. We had a guy we hired, an IT support person, and he was a really nice guy, kind of pretty young, almost like, in his early 20s. And he was a little shaky on just not so much skill set, but, he would be late, a little bit, and just he was a little shaky on some of the soft skills around work. And so I remember there was one day he called me, and it was, 11 o'clock, and you're supposed to be there at 8. And he said, hey, I'm sorry, man, I hit a deer on the way to work. I'm at car repair shop, my car's all. And so I was like, oh, just, don't worry about it. Take care of that. Like, thanks for letting me know. And then the next day it got to be around 10 o'clock in the morning, and he's not there. And then he calls and says, you're not going to believe this, but I hit a deer again, another deer. And I was like, well, that's unlikely. But I guess, it could happen. And I was like, oh, God, you're just having the worst week. Like, hope things are okay. Just kind of get here when you can. And of course, I didn't hear from the rest of the day. And then, of course, by the third morning, when he had hit a third deer coming into work, I realized, maybe my desire to kind of like, almost trust him as on the friendship level, is essentially, in some ways hurting the business. And so there's been that balance a little bit where, with friendships, I tend to be a pretty loyal person. If someone's having a rough time or something comes up, I want to support them. But here and there's been a balance around that. So I've tried to kind of figure that out over the years, and that's actually been hard, though.
Yeah, that's I always love the deer story. We were talking about that beforehand, and we were like, we need to save this because I want to see Anna Kate's like genuine reaction to the deer story.
It's like there's not going to be a third. That can't be it. But what was the third deer?
I mean, it could happen. It's possible.
We are solving all the tech problems and reducing the deer population in Tennessee.
Thinning it out.
That's right.
We a couple of, I guess, examples of just kind of from my experience seeing this is that, I was when I was sick with COVID, like I was getting daily text messages from everybody I work with, from JJ down to my boss, down to just coworkers that just checking on me, seeing if I needed anything. And of course I was like, no, I'm fine, but thank you. And even just my boss, as someone who has like a celiac disease, I can't have anything with gluten in it. He sent me this big, massive care package just out of the blue one day with all these gluten-free treats and things. And I think that one thing that Atiba does differently is that we don't only talk the talk, but we walk the walk. And there's so many companies that preach like, hey, we're one big happy family and we love our employees and rah rah this, rah rah that. But I think that Atiba, they don't say those words explicitly, but they really do make it about a family environment. And I know that if I ever have something with my kids I need to do, that it's going to be no problem. I can go do it. If I ever want to take a vacation, okay, no problem. Just let us know and go enjoy your time. But the personal perks is what makes Atiba really, really cool. And that you don't put people in positions to feel awkward or to be uncomfortable, and you make things optional. And the office being optional has been great because it gives the employees time to really focus on their family and making sure that everybody's happy and healthy in that way, and also not having an hour plus commute downtown if they don't have to. So that's always a win. But yeah, so I wanted to point those couple things out, and I think that kind of comes from the top down, and where Atiba is going to go in the future, I think is going to be driven from this. It is personal. I mean, you get to know these people, you work with them, day in and day out. But do you think, JJ, that your experience in college as a psychology major has played into that at all? Or was it one of those things where you just kind of fell into this very personal model of how to run a business?
Actually, I do think that ended up having a pretty decent effect on me. At first, when I started getting into computers after I spent so much money on college and I was paying my student loans and all that, I was like, oh God, why did this is a total waste. I should have majored in computer science. But then, as you kind of get into the work world, you could see where actually the some of the classes that I took were actually, pretty helpful. And there was a couple classes that I almost think would be good for anyone to take, no matter what their major is. One was I took a class on counseling, on like therapy. And basically as part of it, you had to, a graduate student, you were a guinea pig, which I don't know if that's totally ethical, but back then I guess it was fine for a graduate student. And you were supposed to just think of any kind of, issue. It didn't have to be like a major trauma, and just kind of use that to talk to them about and do a few sessions, and they'd film it for the graduate student. And then at the same time, we had to each find someone to do counseling for. And again, it was kind of supposed to be kind of light topics. And so that was interesting. And one, it made me kind of see that the person I was working with was someone I didn't know super well, kind of an acquaintance. And I was the counselor. And a lot of the counseling is about active listening and, giving someone a way to know that they're understood and to facilitate them thinking through whatever is best to solve whatever issue that they're working on. And so I just think through that, it almost like breaks through maybe the mask a little bit. Most of us could wear a little bit at work or in any kind of social environment, and kind of lets you know it's okay to be vulnerable. And you kind of start realizing when you really start talking to someone, they have stuff going on in their life that you just don't know about, and it just, I guess, gave me like a respect for that. So I think that helped. And then the other class that was kind of interesting I took, it was called Small Group Behavior. And this was really interesting. All you did was the first day you went into this room and the chairs were in a circle, and there was a teaching assistant in there with you, and you're kind of sitting around. And after about 20 minutes, someone kind of says, like, what are we supposed to do? And the teaching assistant just says, just whatever you want. And so basically you just observe how groups are formed, and interactions. And I remember that was really interesting because you could see, how much the group you're in can affect, how you feel. And of course you kind of know that intuitively, but when you're really observing it. And so I think around that, like I remember thinking back to that class, and, I was like, I want to have something where, people are comfortable, they're confident, and they know they can say the wrong thing and no one will laugh at them. And they can make mistakes. And if they have a social faux pas, like that's okay. It's like, just again, like good friends would be. And so those two classes kind of, I think, affected me a bit, on how, sort of this general sort of everything's personal vibe. And then I read something about, the line that, it's nothing personal, it's just business. That was like originated, from like a mobster, like who was killing people. And so, but you hear that in our work world sometimes, like, hey, it's not personal, it's just business. Sorry. And so I thought, well, that's not right. And so between all that, I just thought we should just break through that, at least on our own company.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, on this topic of kind of giving people the benefit of the doubt, I really like what you're saying about how groups form and what makes people feel comfortable and like allowing them a space to feel vulnerable and all that. I feel like that kind of is represented in one of the hiring practices I've noticed just in the last year and a half is sometimes it seems like you'll meet good people and bring them on, even if we don't quite have the right spot for them. And maybe they don't fit cleanly into one of our existing roles, but also maybe we don't need another person in this field right now, but we're going to go ahead and bring them on because they seem like a great person. And we'll just kind of hope for the best and plug them in when we can. Can you speak a little bit to like kind of how you've thought about that over the years?
Yeah. So, a lot of these have just been after 30 years of, doing this. It's like kind of lessons learned, like, what's worked and what hasn't, both in our own, like from our own company, as well as, being the computer consultant, you get to see behind the scenes of like 1,000 other companies, and kind of like what worked and what hasn't. And of course, there's no perfect right way, to manage a group or a company. or even on the hiring. There's some subjectivity to it. But I'll embarrass both of you guys for a moment. Anna Kate, who we've known each other a long time, before we were working together here. And I knew when we started talking, I liked that it wasn't like interviewing. We were just like talking like, oh, I'm thinking about making a change. Like, I'm interested in this area. What do you think? And so really, through that, it's just kind of fun, almost like trying to figure out like, what's the best bang for the buck for you. And if you're taking on a role that you hadn't done before. And so, there's some obvious things like, it's good to have, people who are smart and are, have a good work ethic, like there's things like that. But then I think a lot of that is just intuition, just gut feel, like, oh, this person, it actually, sometimes I'll just sense this person's enthusiastic, and that alone will kind of like say, okay, like we can find a spot for them and they'll add value quickly. And then also, I think, I have seen that a lot of the stuff we do, it's hard to learn, but it's learnable. Like if you can just kind of stick with it and make it, get past the first few months, like I have no idea about all this tech stuff, what everybody's doing. If you can get past that, it's learnable. You just have to have the enthusiasm about you to keep on going with it. And so I just kind of, sense that about you, of course, long before you worked, we were working together here. And so, even though in the project management role you're in now, like it, wasn't something you had done the exact same thing before, it's worked out great. And then Joey, for you, like, I know you hadn't sold, you were, I think, working at a wiring company or something. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So, like nothing to do with what you're, the business development around a tech consulting company. Um, but right off the bat, and probably anybody, Joe, who talks to you can tell your personality lends itself, basically to giving honest advice, without being too salesy. And so I just figured you would fit in perfectly. And so that's kind of been how we've hired, and that's also fun for me because again, it makes things more personal. Like Glenn, the first person I mentioned that I hired. Glenn was working as the tool shop guy at this factory in Columbia, Tennessee. So he was not doing computer stuff. He was just working in a factory. And when I met him, he told me that he's been doing programming at night for fun, just on his own. He actually was, I remember it was kind of funny. He told me that he bought a copy of C++, the programming language, at a flea market. And then he started messing with it and he got into it. And same thing there. I just thought that's pretty cool. He's a unique person. And for him, at the time I was coding all the time myself. And for like a month, like I was kind of showing him stuff like, okay. And then maybe this doesn't say a lot, but he passed me up. Like week 5, he was much better coder than myself. And I was very, very glad we found him. And, he's one of the better, tech people I've ever seen. And so I think I like just the character around, hiring a little bit based on just personality, not just, raw skill set on something. So
Yeah, I can see that. That's neat. You kind of look for a good person, somebody who shows some of these characteristics that you're talking about, enthusiasm and hunger to learn and that kind of thing, and then fit them in. Something that you mentioned on let me get this right, the Bald Bearded Boss podcast recently that I thought was really interesting is because, we are in technology, we're in software development, and there is a real challenge to hire developers right now. And I think I'll get this right, but you said something like, even if we don't necessarily need someone with a particular technical skill set because it can be so difficult to hire and there's like a shortage, you will hire someone maybe and just even have them on the bench for a short time. And that has worked itself out for you, like from a business perspective, having people that maybe you can't plug into a client right away, but just at least having the person as opposed to the reverse where you have a need to fill, but you can't because you don't have someone to fill. I thought that was really interesting and also kind of speaks to that, kind of looking for good people, just keeping the bench full, even if there's not a need right now. Did I get that right? That's kind of
Yeah. So, early on, like a lot of businesses, especially services businesses, like you get a new project or a new client and, then you scramble if you're overloaded to go hire someone. And sometimes you have no choice. It's especially when you're first starting. You can't afford to kind of hire ahead. But as has gone by, and we've grown and been able to afford it a little bit better. And with the shortage of techies, and not just techies, it's kind of almost anyone related to anything, any part of the tech world. We kind of thought, okay, if we come across someone who seems like they'd be really good, even if we don't have the perfect need for them right now, we're better off going ahead and getting them in the mix. And some of that has been some of that is just, mathematically kind of for the business, like, it makes sense. You don't want to make a bad business decision just financially. But then the other part is those days, the .com days when, the few of us were, working 16 hours a day. As I got older, I began to rethink that. And especially when I had kids myself, you're like, okay, that, this is not practical really. And this shouldn't be, this way. And no one should be under pressure to do that. So some of that too has been about, trying to actually ease the load on the group as a whole, even if it does nothing but just makes us a better place to work long term. And so all this for me has been about the long term. So I mean, I've hoped to have this place where it's a little more personal, where if someone wanted to, they could be here forever, and it would be we'd be a good place, and they would have flexibility and have a way to do other things in life outside of work, that are good for them.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. And the way you said that makes me think. And we were going to wrap up this podcast probably on this question here. But Atiba's been around for 30 years. Started in 1992. It's 2022. That's a very long time for a company to exist and to do so well and to continue to grow. I guess what is, in your opinion, is going to make Atiba go another 30 years to hit that 60-year anniversary? I mean, other than me running the place once you retire, I mean, what else do you think is going to really drive Atiba to continue to be around and be relevant for 30 more years?
So I got on this thing, when I got into doing software development and programming, there's like versions, version of software. You have version 1, and then version 1.1 and version 2 and so on. And if you think about it, there's like, anything from like Microsoft Word, to Google, you'll see over time, kind of keeps on reinventing themselves. And so that's in general, not even just the next 30 years, but just one step at a time. I've found like same thing with the company. You have to keep on tweaking and optimizing and changing, both with the times, and just with what the demand is and the cards you're dealt, with a shortage of techies or whatever it is. And so yeah, I just think of just like we're building software, building a company, we just keep on tweaking it and trying to optimize it and being willing to change a little bit as we go. And of course, here and there, just like software, we can have scope creep, and usually because of me, like I'm thinking of, we can do this, this, and that, and that'll be better next year. And so there's a healthy debate on what to tweak and what to keep the same. But anyway, that's hopefully the keep on doing that long term will keep us around, for the next 30 years.
That's awesome. And JJ, just as someone who over the last 2 years, I would now consider you a friend, as you talked earlier. Just thank you for being on here. And I know this podcast is powered by Atiba, but it's great to hear just from you, your perspective on it. And Anna-Kate, of course, thank you for everything you've added to it. If you want to, we can just, you can sign us off from here, Anna-Kate.
All right. Awesome. Well, JJ, we are so glad to have you as our first guest on the podcast. And over the next few episodes, we'll be interviewing other people from the Nashville community, from the tech world, from the business world, just spanning a lot of different genres. But, really kind of keeping with our half geek, half human theme. And we're really looking forward to it. So thanks, everyone, for joining us. And thanks, JJ. Thanks to you too, Joey. And we'll talk to you guys soon.
You've been listening to Half Geek, Half Human.